Clarkston, Michigan, the greatest city in the world. It's the Jose Aliaga Show. Jose Aliaga knows everyone. Get to know him as he interviews some of the most fascinating people from the greater Independence Township area. And now, broadcasting from the studios at Clarkston High School, the home of the state champion Wolves, here's Jose Aliaga.
Welcome to the Jose Aliaga Show. Today we have a special guest, and it's an honor and privilege to have Dr. Christopher Douglas, economic professor from University of Michigan Flint. Dr. Douglas, how are you doing?
Good, thanks for having me today.
Thanks. How was the drive?
Everything was great, yep. No traffic, no accidents.
Good. Is your first time in Independence Township today?
No, I've been here several times. Clarkston Union Wood Shop's here, so I like to come down for good barbecue every time I can.
Oh, good, good. Well, today we probably want to talk today about Proposal 1, and a lot of people is wondering what is this about. Some people already know, but know much about it. So what do you think about Proposal 1? I mean, we know it's about, we have a common problem, which is the roads. We have a lot of potholes, it's unsafe to drive, and the state government is proposing a solution for it, which is increased taxes. So what do you think about this proposal?
Yeah, so I think everyone agrees the roads are in pretty rough shape in Michigan. Mm-hmm. The problem really is, like any other good or service to the economy, there's a cost associated with building roads and maintaining the roads. Traditionally in Michigan, we've used the gas tax. The gas tax is like a user fee on roads. The more you drive, the more gas you buy, the roads you use, the more tax you pay. The problem is in Michigan, the gas tax hasn't been increased since 1999, where then Governor Engler increased it from roughly 13 cents a gallon to 19 cents a gallon. Mm-hmm. So the gas tax is a fixed 19 cent per gallon, so when prices rose throughout the last decade, Michigan didn't bring in any more revenue, and in fact might have lost revenue if people drove less as a result of higher prices. So we've had a problem in Michigan. Gas tax revenue has been flat or actually decreasing over time due to inflation, while road costs have gone up, which is why we see the deterioration of roads that we've seen. The state legislature has been very hesitant to raise gas taxes. No one wants to be tagged as a tax hiker, so that option seems to be off the table. So what they've done is really punted the issue to voters. The idea being, if voters pass a tax increase, well, that's okay. We'll use the increase of the sales tax to try to finance road improvement along with some other stuff in the Michigan economy.
I see. But some people were saying that we already have existing tax that goes to the roads, but actually don't go to actually an account that is allocated for the roads. It goes to the general funds. And many people I hear were saying that money, basically that general funds is used for whatever the government want to do and not for the roads. What do you think about that? Do you think that we should have an account where this new tax or the current that we have should go to a special account just for the roads? That's it?
I think in a perfect world, that's what would happen. You would have a separate account for roads. Road revenue would flow into that account, ideally through perhaps a user fee, a gas tax, or really the ultimate user fee is a toll. Lots of states use toll roads on interstate highways to pay for road maintenance. For whatever reason, Michigan hasn't done that historically. I think the problem with an account is that there's always ways to tap into that account. So for instance, we have the school aid fund in Michigan. The state legislature finds ways to tap into the school aid fund to balance the budget, which is what happened this year. Voters feel pretty burdened about what happened with the lottery several years ago. The idea would be we'd have a state lottery that would bring in revenue to schools into a special account. School funding would go up. Well, what happened was the legislature just diverted less general fund revenue towards schools because of the lottery. So money's fungible at the end of the day. You can use it for whatever you want. So if you have a special account, well, that just means that you're able to divert less general fund revenue into that special account if you have other revenues flowing into that account. So I think the idea of an account is nice. Unfortunately, perhaps it's a bit overrated.
I see. I see. But now you see, as you know, you're an economist, when you raise taxes, not always bring more revenues. Actually, because as you know, when you lower taxes is when actually people spend more money and you collect more revenues. So you think that's gonna help with since we increase taxes?
Yeah, I know there's this idea that you could cut taxes and bring more revenue in. I think that solely happens for pretty extreme tax rates. So for instance, if you had something like a 95% income tax rate, so 95 cents out of every dollar you earned went to the government, that would be a huge disincentive to work. People wouldn't work very much. If you cut that rate down to say 40% or something reasonable, that would induce more of a work effort. People would work more, pay more taxes, revenues would go up. You're not talking about an extreme tax rate like that with the gas tax. You're talking 19 cents per gallon out of a $2.50 per gallon price. So if you raise the gas tax by say a nickel or a dime, and you do it incrementally over time, you're not going to have a huge disincentive effect where people are going to drive less as a result of that tax increase and consequently pay less in gas tax revenues. So when you're talking fairly small tax rates like the gas tax, you're not going to see a huge incentive effect through either cutting or raising taxes.
I see. So you mentioned we don't have nothing, basically since Governor Engler, we didn't actually do anything with the gas tax, correct?
That's right.
So,
And the problem is road construction costs have gone up because really oil prices play a key role in road construction costs because blacktop is an oil-based product. The equipment you use in building roads requires a lot of fossil fuels as an input. So you really saw oil prices go up substantially over the last decade, but gas tax revenues were flat due to the gas tax being flat. So rising costs coupled with flat revenue means less road work can get done, which is why we've seen a pretty substantial deterioration of road conditions over time. And it's not like in the 1990s roads were that great to begin with. So you're kind of starting with average or perhaps slightly subpar roads in Michigan, and then just due to a combination of increasing costs and flat revenues, you can't even maintain that road quality.
I see. Well, I want to also talk to, since you're here and you have a lot of knowledge about economy, I want to actually go to a different subject now about our federal debt. We were talking about this before, about I see a lot of people's concern that we're spending more money than what we're getting in, and we borrow money from China to cover up debts. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree the federal deficit and the federal debt are both huge problems. They really don't get the attention they deserve. The Chinese hold a lot of debt in terms of the raw dollar amount, something like $1.5 trillion of US government debt. But in the grand scheme of things, it's a pretty small fraction of the national debt. One of the largest holders of the national debt are other branches of government, in particular the Federal Reserve and the Social Security Administration. So the idea is that over the last 20 to 30 years, we've brought in more in Social Security taxes than we've paid out in benefits. The idea being that we could save up for when the baby boomers start to retire and start drawing benefits. And the way we've saved up is that we've used the Social Security surplus to buy existing government debt, which sounds like a good idea because government debt, savings bonds, if you will, are a pretty safe investment. The practical problem is that the Social Security Administration invests the trust funds of government debt. The Treasury Department takes the proceeds of that investment and then spends it. So if the Social Security Administration wants to cash in the trust fund, the Treasury Department has to pay that debt back, which is difficult to do because that means raising taxes or cutting spending somewhere else, two activities the federal government's not really great at doing.
But why we borrow money from China?
Just because they're a purchaser of federal debt, when we have to cover the budget deficit, meaning year to year, the federal government brings in less in tax revenues than what it spends. So how do you cover the difference? Well, the Treasury Department issues debt. And the way it does it is it just has an auction. People promise to give the Treasury Department money in exchange for this debt. The Treasury Department then will pay the debt back with interest. The Chinese government participates in those auctions, buys debt just like any other member of the general public can. So it's not like it's a purposeful, we need to borrow money from China. It's just that they have money, they're looking for somewhere to park it. US government debt's an attractive place to park it because at least historically, the federal government has never defaulted on its debt. It's always paid back its debt plus interest.
Now, the federal government has been printing a lot of US dollars to circulate around. And as we know, as much money we print that create inflation. And I remember way before we talked about years ago, you said that sometimes, not always, sometimes it's good to create inflation to make our products cheaper so we can export and sell it at lower price than other countries. In this case, you think this inflation is good for our economy?
Yeah, so when you're talking inflation in that context, you're talking about the dollar depreciating against foreign currency. So whenever you have inflation in the US, that drives down the value of the dollar. That puts our exports at a competitive advantage compared to everyone else's. So that's a short run effect. Maybe it lasts a year or two or so. But in the long run, inflation is always detrimental to the economy. That's how we got into trouble in the 1970s. We haven't had inflation yet in the US economy, despite pretty aggressive monetary policy. If you talk about the other branch of government that holds a lot of our debt, that's the Federal Reserve. Because what happens is the Treasury Department issues debt to cover the budget deficit. The Federal Reserve steps in, prints money, and buys that newly issued debt up. That's called monetizing the debt, expansionary monetary policy, if you will. That's always inflationary in the long run. It hasn't been inflationary yet because, for technical reasons, that newly printed money hasn't hit the broader economy. It's gone into the banking sector or just stopped there, so it hasn't been inflationary yet. If that newly printed money ever hit the broader economy, yeah, we would have a problem on our hands. I think that would be a clear negative for the US economy. So in the short run, dollar depreciation through perhaps inflation is good. In the long run, inflation is always a problem.
Yeah, it is. And they appreciate that. I went to South America last year, and I can see back a few years ago, $1 was 3.50 cents soles in Peru. Now $1 is 2.80, so it's depreciated dollar value in international markets.
So you can kind of see how that works in Peru's favor, right? Because Americans are more likely to buy stuff in Peru, more likely to travel in Peru. Puts Peru's exports at an advantage, but it's difficult for people in Peru if you're relying on foreign imports in order to have the day-to-day necessities.
Right. But back in the day, it used to be actually you can get more money by $1. Right. 3.50, now it's 2.80. It depreciates the dollar value in the later years. But no, I agree with you. You're right about that. It's more for benefits for us than go to South America and spend money because our money is more. Absolutely right. But now, since what we're facing right now, what will be your recommendation that what the next administration should do to be able to? I mean, we're gonna face inflation. We're gonna face we have too much deficit. We have what, $16 trillion, I think. Right
yeah, it's ballpark around there.
Yeah. So what do you think the next administration should do?
So when you talk about inflation, almost always inflation is being driven by the budget deficit. The government's not bringing in enough tax revenues to pay for its expenditures. It prints money to cover the difference. We're doing that right now. It hasn't been inflationary yet. I worry that over the next 10 to 15 years it will be inflationary. If you look at what's driving the deficit right now, it's Social Security and Medicare spending. Entitlement spending is increasing very rapidly. Combination of rising healthcare prices for Medicare, and just more and more baby boomers are retiring and drawing Social Security, and they're living longer too. Life expectancy is rising. There's no limit about how long you could collect Social Security for. If you live to be 200, you collect Social Security for 200 years after you retire. So that's going to be where the budget deficits in the future come from. In order to address the budget deficit and future inflation, you have to get entitlement spending under control. And historically, politicians are very hesitant to tackle entitlement spending. Entitlement spending is very popular with senior citizens. They like collecting Social Security, they like Medicare, and they vote. The typical voter is a female who's in her probably early 60s, right on the cusp of collecting those entitlements. So if you tell that lady, we're going to cut entitlements to balance the budget, that's not going to go over very well, and the politician's going to have a tough time winning re-election. So somehow we have to get this time and consistency problem under control. They will do the upfront hit right now to get entitlements under control so we don't have future budget deficits and inflation, even though getting entitlements under control right now comes with that immediate political cost. Right.
Well, Dr. Douglas, I know that time is limited, but I have more other questions. I want to move to the next subject, which is the state economy. What do you think about Michigan economy right now with Governor Snyder. What is your opinion about that?
So I think the Michigan economy has improved quite a bit. But part of that's because we were starting with such a low baseline in 2008 and 2009 that we fell so rapidly that there's really only one way but up. But I think the Michigan economy has showed fundamental improvement. The state budget has been balanced throughout the Snyder administration, so we don't have these perennial budget crises with government shutdowns that we've had. We've posted positive job creation over the last several years, which is a good thing. The unemployment rate in Michigan has come down. It's still above the national average, but historically in Michigan, the unemployment rate almost is always above the national average, even going back to the 70s and 80s. So we are making up a lot of ground, but unfortunately there's just a lot of ground to be made up. If you look the last decade, 2001 to say 2008, and then even beyond, we lost something like 1 million jobs in Michigan. So it's just going to take several years of job growth just to get back to where we were in the late 1990s. So yeah, I think the economy's improved. It just has a long way to go.
I see. No, I agree with that. Actually, I was telling you before, we used to have more representation, more population, because according to population, we have more representation in the Congress. We went down from 18 electoral college to 16. And that's why? Because in the last 8 years, from 2001 to 2008, it was decreasing population. Why? Unemployment.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
People have to move.
And really, it stems from the decline of the traditional big three auto companies. That if you go back to the 1960s, General Motors by itself had 50% of the U.S. auto market. You do General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, that's over 90% of the U.S. auto market. Well, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler right now barely touch 50% of the U.S. auto market. It might actually be a little bit less than 50%. I'd have to check. So every percentage point of market share is something like 150,000 cars that aren't sold. So if you lose 50% of the market, that's 150,000 cars times 50 fewer cars that are being sold. And given Michigan's historic dependence on auto manufacturing, that's a lot of Michigan jobs. You had plants in Flint that would employ 25,000 people. Back in the day, River Rouge and outside of Detroit had 100,000 people who worked for it. So whenever you close a factory that employed 20,000 people, it takes a lot of job creation just to make that up.
You're right.
So it's this long-term decline of the traditional Michigan-based auto manufacturing that could really go a long way in explaining, well, where did the Michigan job losses come from? Why does our unemployment rate remain stubbornly higher than the national unemployment rate?
True. And Michigan make good products now. I mean, I can see our products have increased. I mean, the value and the quality is very good. Just lately, I saw a commercial of GM having these new cars with internet, incorporated internet. I said, that's kind of really curious. I would like to see one of those.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious how that works too. But even if you just look at the raw quality data, General Motors has dramatically improved since the early 1980s. Their defect rate has fallen by like 100%. The time it takes to build a car has fallen by close to 100% too. So really General Motors has gone a long way. Ford and Chrysler too, in terms of being more productive and having higher quality, as a consequence of facing competition from foreigners, Toyota, Honda, and so forth.
A question, how people can help our economy, Michigan economy? Someone says before, buying Michigan products, when you go to the store, buy some, you know, most of Michigan products have a sticker or something, a label that says made in Michigan. Is that help our economy, buying maybe a pop, like any Michigan product, it help? Or?
Sure, if the bottle of Michigan-made pop is the same as outside of Michigan pop, which it is. I think Faygo actually is a little bit cheaper than Pepsi or Coke. Yeah, that does help Michigan. That gives a guy at the Faygo factory a job that he turns around and spends money in Michigan. So yeah, that helps. So where it gets a little bit dicier is what happens when the Michigan product costs more than the national product. Because if you spend more on the Michigan product, yeah, that helps the Michigan company, but that gives you less money left over to go spend on other Michigan businesses. So it's hard to know how that nets out. So I think where the Michigan companies do well is when they promote their quality.
The quality,
yeah.
Okay.
So the craft beer industry, interestingly enough, in Michigan is really emerging as a significant sector. And beer drinkers will say, well, craft beer is just better than the macro brewed beer. And I think Michigan craft beer manufacturers do well at promoting that quality to give people a reason to buy the beer other than Michigan patriotism.
I see. I know you are limited of time. You need to go back, but to school. But this is gonna be my last question.
Oh, I have time for more questions.
Oh, good, good. I want to go now to the, because you have also good knowledge about politics, and that my question is about the primary, the Republican primary coming up. And you know, we have already announced Senator Ted Cruz from Texas. We got Rand Paul from Kentucky. We got Senator also Marco Rubio. The four of them are base 40, very young, new blood for the Republican Party. And I wonder, what is your opinion about them?
I think it's too early to tell right now. There's all these people who say, or people predict will get in. Jeb Bush, I don't know if you mentioned him.
Yeah, Jeb Bush.
Chris Christie, long speculated. There might be some governors out there. John Kasich's name's been floated, and even Rick Snyder's name's been floated recently too.
Yes.
So I think right now it's just so hard to know who's a viable candidate, who's not a viable candidate. I mean, if you go back in history, like to 1996, Phil Gramm, senator, everyone thought he was going to give Bob Dole a run for his money, but then when it came primary and caucus time, he just petered out. So it's hard to know at this point who's going to be a viable long-term candidate, who's going to peter out. So I guess my short answer is too early to tell.
Well, earlier when we were talking, I don't know it was you, it says that we were talking earlier that usually someone like before you told me it was Bob Dole and everybody knew he's gonna win. Then there was someone else before and so forth. I mean, McCain, Mitt Romney. We don't have that feeling now.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, if you go back even to the 60s after Barry Goldwater for the Republicans, it always feels like you kind of have this imaginary line where the next guy at the head of the line is the one who gets the nomination. So Nixon in '68 is an example. Gerald Ford's a unique situation, but Ronald Reagan really gives him a run for the money in '76. So he kind of feels like the next guy in line by 1980. 1988, George H.W. Bush feels like the next guy in line because he was vice president, of course. 2000, that's a little bit dicier. George W. Bush, maybe perhaps because of name recognition and so forth. But John McCain gives him a pretty strong run for the money in the primary, so he kind of feels like the next guy in line for 2008. Mitt Romney gives him a run for the money in 2008, so he feels like the next guy in line for 2012. And you don't really have that next guy in line feel for 2016. Maybe Jeb Bush a little bit, but people kind of tire of the Bush name. It kind of feels like for the first time in maybe 40 years that the primary seems pretty well open.
But according to what you just said, no, maybe it will be Rick Santorum, the one next in line? For what you just said, maybe? Or
although he doesn't really feel like the guy who was next to the line from the 2012 primary. Because of the 2012 primary, you had Mitt Romney as the clear front runner. Then every couple weeks, a new number two would emerge. You had Newt Gingrich for a couple weeks, and then he petered out. Ron Paul had his time in the sun too, that he petered out. Santorum was just kind of like the last guy remaining to give Romney a run for his money. So to me, he never really felt like he had the staying power like say McCain in 2000 did, or Ronald Reagan in 1976 did. So he doesn't really, to me, feel like the next guy in line. But maybe I'm wrong.
I believe he has a very exploratory committee. He's testing the water, but it's a surprise he didn't announce yet since he was battled with Mitt Romney until the end, the last primary.
Yeah, I think his problem too is he's been out of office for quite a long time. I forget if it was 04 or 06 that Santorum lost his re-election campaign in Pennsylvania. It might have been 2004. But anyway, I mean, that's just a long time to be out of elective office and then make a serious bid for the presidency. Especially that he lost his re-election campaign by double digits.
Oh, really? From double digits?
Yeah, that was one of those that was kind of over as soon as the polls closed.
Oh, yeah. But now, I believe Marco Rubio is risking a lot because when he decided to run president, the decision was between going for re-election for U.S. Senate or run for president. But if he loses this primary, he's out.
Is it really?
Yeah.
I forget it was 2010 that Marco Rubio won, so that would be right.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because in certain states you don't have that problem. So Rand Paul has the same dilemma in Kentucky. But in Kentucky you can run for both.
Oh, really?
So if Rand Paul loses the primary, he could still become U.S. Senator.
Oh.
So you get like these state-to-state nuances in election law.
Oh, then Well, I remember I wrote something. I was reading on Facebook that somebody was saying that maybe it's not quite accurate, but it's what I wrote.
There's always
Facebook. You never see what.
Yeah, I know. There's always this possibility too that there's filing deadlines for the U.S. Senate. So maybe Rubio could go out there, test the waters. If the primary's not going his way, maybe he could drop out and get back in the Senate race. That's always a possibility too. It's just hard to know. State-to-state election laws are different. You never know what the details are until they apply to a certain situation. Like certain states, if you lose the primary, you're banned from running in the general election as a write-in or as an independent candidate. But some states you aren't. So for example, Lisa Murkowski in Alaska loses her primary for the U.S. Senate. She's able to run as a write-in and wins. Whereas in West Virginia, Eric Cantor loses his primary race. They have what's called a sore loser law in West Virginia, which says if you lose your primary, you're done. You can't run in the general. So, I mean, it's inconsistent state to state, so it's hard to know what the rules are.
Yeah, it's true. It is true. It depends which state. But now, some people up there is saying, Jose, I always want a governor. I'm looking to see which one is the most conservative governor. And I ask them, why? Because governors have executive experience by dealing with House and Senate and House in the state legislature, and have experience appointing cabinet. So they have the mindset and the experience working with like a small government. Senators are legislators, but they don't have the experience. So some people are up there saying that. Do you agree with that?
I'm sympathetic to that argument, actually, because as governor, you have a real responsibility. You have to balance the budget because most states have a balanced budget amendment. You have to work with the legislature to get your agenda passed. Whereas if you're a U.S. senator, you don't really have to take much of a stand on anything. If your bill dies, well, you have 99 other senators, 435 House members, and a president you can blame. You never have real accountability like a governor has. You never really have to balance the budget because senators have the luxury of running a budget deficit because there's no federal balanced budget amendment. So just because governors have to actually balance a budget and manage state agencies, I'm slightly sympathetic to the idea that they make better presidents, all things equal.
I see. But senators always claim that they're update of what's going on in Washington because they always are seeing what or oversee what the other agencies in the federal government are doing. So they're update because the governor don't know what's going on in the Federal Reserve or what is inflation, or what's going on in the. I mean, they claim that what's going on in Washington.
Sure, but I mean, if unless you're a member of the Senate Banking Committee, I'm not really sure how up to date you are on Federal Reserve policy. Or there's always the knock on governors, right, is they don't have any foreign policy experience. Well, Michigan's helped by that, right, because we have Canada. Governor Snyder has worked with the Canadians about the second bridge in Detroit. But unless you're a border state, you're always tagged with, oh, you don't know anything about foreign policy. Well, it's not really clear a senator knows a lot about foreign policy either, unless you're on, say, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So maybe senators get some grade inflation, if you will, by being in the federal government so people think they know what's going on with the federal government. But I'm always slightly skeptical about that claim for reasons I just got done saying.
No, I agree. I mean, governors also know what's going on in inflation. They know what's going on because they have to work with Washington sometimes. Well, not sometimes, but a lot of times. But
well, sure, for things like transportation funding, for things like federal grants, more and more you're seeing the state budgets come from the federal government in the form of grants. Kind of Obamacare is the extreme example where you have to set up the insurance exchanges in order to expand Medicaid to get your insurance subsidies. So you really have to know what's going on with the federal government to make sure you dot all the I's and cross all the T's to make sure you get your Obamacare subsidies.
But now, that is what we're talking will be a great candidate, that what we're talking about right now with experience, all that, assuming something if, people have to choose, you're saying governors will have better experience and be ready to be a president. But the reality show in the last election, we elect someone that was a senator just 2 years.
Right.
And run for state senator to federal senator, U.S. senator. And then from then, President of the United States with 2 years experience.
Right. Yeah, I thought that was a little disconcerting too, to jump from state senate to U.S. Senate and then the presidency all in the span of a couple of years each post. Some people might say that has been reflected in the performance of the last 8 years. Some people says that, well, some people might say, well, that shows experience is overrated. And I guess it's up to the individual person to put his or her perspective on it. But I'm in the view that more experience in general is better than less experience, because the presidency does have real legitimate responsibility.
Well, talking about governors, we hear now Scott Walker may run, Rick Snyder may run, and I think both of them have a good experience. They show positive results overall. So what do you think about Scott Walker?
Interesting candidate. In terms of lack of experience, he was the county executive for whatever county Milwaukee is in before becoming governor. So he kind of did a big leap from county executive to governor. Single-term governor, I believe he's up for re-election, or maybe he's faced re-election already. It's hard to know because he had the recall halfway through his first term. Survived that, got a lot of reforms through that conservatives like. So I think he could kind of be a viable dark horse candidate, if you will, in terms of a guy who's kind of risen rapidly to become a serious presidential contender. So yeah, I think he could get a lot of, he's one of those guys I think that could either get a lot of grassroots support and make a viable run, or I think he's a guy who could kind of peter out early. It's hard to know.
What about Rick Snyder?
Yeah, again, I think a lot of it hinges on proposal one. That's kind of, for better or worse, Snyder's signature proposal right now. If that fails, I think that is a hit in Rick Snyder's political capital. But if that passes, Rick Snyder has a lot of tangible results he can point to. He's got right to work, the second bridge, the expansion of Medicaid, which happened despite Republican opposition, and perhaps proposal one. So he's got a real track record of every policy proposal he's put forth has been enacted, which might be looked upon favorably with the electorate. Again, it's hard to know. He might be a guy who gets a groundswell of support. He might be a guy who throws his hat in the ring and goes nowhere. He might be a guy who never throws his hand in the ring. It's just so hard to predict. If you go back to 2004, Howard Dean, former governor of Vermont, no one had ever heard of him. I mean, who knows who the governor of Vermont is right now? Ordinarily, you would think that his candidacy would get nowhere. But he turned out to be a legitimate contender throughout the early round of primaries. So it's just, at this point, it's just so hard to know.
And though he just says something, you just yell something, woohoo, and then
right, it's hard to know. It's hard to know in the parallel universe what would have happened had he not yelled. Maybe he could have won later primaries, because New Hampshire was a week later, and then you go through another string of major primaries. Maybe he could have got some legwork had he not done the so-called Dean screen. Yes.
Well, Dr. Douglas, before we end the show, if someone have a question or someone want to maybe email you or contact you, you would like to share your email?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, feel free to get a hold of me.
Okay, it's ccdougla@uofmflin.edu, right?
Right,
Is that correct? Okay, good, Dr. Douglas. Thank you so much. It was an honor and privilege, and actually I get to know more about what's going on, and thanks for sharing your knowledge with us.
Well, thanks for the invite. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Well, if you want to be in the Jose Aliaga show, you can contact us Facebook or by also calling me to 248-736-7163. Thank you and have a blessed day.